Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Keith Martin, the Executive Director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health, and welcome to our ongoing Global Health Leaders Series. And it is my distinct pleasure today to introduce you to an incredible colleague and friend, a global health leader, Dr. Peter Singer, who you'll find has had a truly extraordinary career. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Singer. He is a Canadian physician. He is currently an advisor to the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros. He was the CEO of Grand Challenges Canada from 2008 for a decade. An organization, please take a look at. It's a wonderful Canadian organization funding projects around the world. And he has published over 600 papers. He's an Order of Canada and one of Canada's great scientists. And Peter, welcome to our Leader Series. We're lovely to have you.
Thank you so much, Keith. It's great to be with you, and congratulations to all the folks in CUGH on the amazing things they're doing.
Well, thanks, Peter. And you've been a great supporter. And what we'll do is we're going to interrogate Dr. Singer. We're going to look at the World Health Organization, and we're going to look at how we as member states around the world can actually strengthen the organization. At the end, we're going to have a special treat because Dr. Singer started his own blog recently, and we're going to take a look at it because it's going to be advice for everybody. But Peter, first of all, you've had a remarkable career. Why did you go into global health, and why did you take this incredible path that you've had throughout your life?
Well, Keith, thank you. I mean, it's been a real privilege for me to really go through 4 career stages. I was a professor of medicine. I co-founded a bioethics center. I co-founded essentially an innovation supporting foundation, Grand Challenges Canada. And then in 2017, had the great luck to go with my brother, Dr. Tedros, to WHO as a special advisor. And when I reflected on what all those things had in common, they had in common social entrepreneurship. So what does that mean? It means you find a problem and solve it. It means something is really bugging you. It's really irritating you, and you want to take some innovative approaches to change it. I mean, the first one I remember was when I was an intern and caring for a woman in her 30s. Sadly, she had metastatic cervical cancer, and we were on rounds with the attending physician. And I remember that, we barely talked about what was going to happen in terms of when her heart stopped, in terms of CPR and do not resuscitate and things like that, and quality end of life care. But we talked ad nauseum about the low phosphorus in her blood, the hypophosphatemia. And that really bugged me. And I wanted to do something about that. So that was a problem. And I spent a lot of time early on doing research on end of life care. So what I would say to everybody is reflect on your own approach and find a problem and solve it. And maybe you'll discover that you're a social entrepreneur as well.
As you're a physician and you are looking at this through this, well, Verka would have a lot to be in agreement with you about looking at our profession as being a big social enterprise to improve people's lives. And in that vein, the WHO has a huge mandate to deal with these big thorny problems, Peter. But why don't we you could share with the audience the big big triple billion targets and those 3 big priorities the WHO has, and some of the big 5 functions that it works across.
Thank you, Keith. When I had the great privilege of going to WHO in 2017 with Dr. Tedros, the real heart of his strategy at that time can be expressed in 4 words: measurable impact in countries. I mean, WHO has had some incredible historical advances. Everyone knows about smallpox, for example, the eradication of smallpox and the international health regulations, framework convention on tobacco control. But he really wanted to refocus the organization on measurable impact in countries. And so we zeroed in on the Sustainable Development Goals, which, by the way, are not going very well at the moment in health. There were about 50 health-related Sustainable Development Goals. We realized that you couldn't strategize, or you could measure 50 things, but you can't manage them. And so we reduced it to 3 clusters of things. Healthier populations, which is all the stuff that's needed to keep people healthy and out of hospital. Think about clean drinking water, safe sanitation, safe roads, et cetera, and climate, of course. Um, uh, Universal health coverage, which is both access to essential services um, and financial protection, and health emergencies, and health emergencies protection, preparedness. And this was before COVID. And we set up measures for each, and we really focused in on those 3 things. Those have now become the first of the 3 first Ps, if you will, because Tedros recently, in a sense, renewed his vision and said, in the next 5 years, we're going to do 3 things: promote health, provide health, protect health. And that's those billions. And also power health, namely think about ways to speed up the Sustainable Development Goals, because they're going at about a quarter of the pace or less they need to reach the 2030 targets. And what COVID showed us is no country was prepared. And the 3 top lessons, of course, were equity, equity, and equity. So power health. And then that's a way to disrupt systems, for example, in innovation, in data and delivery, in partnerships, and improve them. And then finally, perform for health, which is how you improve the organization itself. Put more emphasis on the country level, the country offices. And, for the first time, the budget now of the base budget will be more than 50% going to country offices. And that's been a strong focus of Tedros as well. So measurable impact in countries, triple billion targets to measure them. And now the 5 Ps of promote health, provide health, protect health, power health, and perform for health.
And that's an incredibly ambitious mandate, Peter, that's completely congruent with the Constitution. But as you alluded, haven't mentioned yet, but what the WHO is being asked to do versus the resources that it is being given, there's a gross mismatch. And I think people need, often the WHO is used as a bit of a scapegoat, but I think people need to understand the WHO is us, right? Can you explain the structure of the WHO? It's not some structure out there. It is us, and we determine what it can do.
You're right. And especially with WHO turning 75 this year, it's a real time for us all to engage. And there's so many ways for every single person listening to this to get deeply engaged in WHO, because it is us. It's really how we work together to, as you mentioned, achieve the vision that was in the Constitution of highest attainable standard of health, and the mission of promoting health, keeping the world safe, serving the vulnerable. That's something we all do. And WHO is us. To your question of structure, so WHO is governed by 194 member states. So it's an intergovernmental organization with an executive board of 34 of them selected by region. Its management is about 8,000 people in the Secretariat, at the headquarters in Geneva, in 6 regional offices, and 150 plus country offices. The budget is about $4 billion all in expenditures. And as you very rightly point out, that's smaller than the size of many academic health sciences centers. And it covers the whole world. And the comparative advantage of WHO, Keith, is probably 3 things. Firstly, leadership. And I think my brother Tedros really demonstrated that during the pandemic with his constant focus on equity, be it vaccine equity or other types of equity, and human rights and gender equality. Secondly, second comparative advantage is essentially the governance platform enabling intergovernmental negotiations and conventions, agreements, et cetera. I mentioned the Framework Convention, but right now we're in the middle on tobacco control, and now we're in the middle of serving as the platform essentially for member states to negotiate a pandemic accord. Only WHO could do that. And then finally, the country offices. and especially the social capital, the trust between the WHO country offices and their leaders, the WHO representatives and the governments. Those three sources of comparative advantage, plus, of course, the technical normative function, let's say four sources of comparative advantage, are really at the heart of what WHO does and can offer the world.
And that again, to be able to do that, it has to have the resources. And you mentioned a larger amount going to the country offices, which is fantastic. It gives them more power. But overall, the listeners may not fully understand how much of the budget actually comes from what we call assessed contributions versus voluntary, and how those voluntary contributions are actually earmarked. It caused a tension in the organization, a difficulty for any director general to be able to manage that. Can you describe what the funding structure is, please, Peter? And
sure. So, and thank you for the opportunity to take it out and to flesh that out a little bit, Keith. And Tedros often emphasizes that it's not only the quantity of the money, it's also the quality of the money and the funding. And that's really what you're getting at. So assessed contributions are essentially the non-earmarked contributions that member states give based on a number of factors, including the size of their economies. And in total, the total amount of assessed contributions when we got there in 2017 accounted for less than 20% of the whole budget and expenditure of WHO. Now imagine, what essentially that means is you don't have control over your own organization, because the donor will say, I like this, and another donor will say, I like that. So you can write whatever strategy you want, but it's totally, you're not able to drive it in a holistic way. So a very historic move under Tedros' leadership in the past year was working with member states to reach an agreement that by the end of the decade, that number will be more than 50%. So more than 50% will come from assessed contributions. That's really a super important move. It's because it's the quality of the money in addition to the quantity of money. That's 50% of the base budget. And now the discussion also is around replenishment, doing more of that ahead of time, on a longer time frame. So these innovations, if you will, in funding may seem pretty mechanical, but they're super important in terms of the effectiveness and efficiency of WHO. And it's great that member states have been supporting that direction because it really enables WHO's ability to act both in terms of the offensive game of speeding up the Sustainable Development Goals, which are lagging so far behind, and its defensive game of helping to support countries to protect against threats. Because like any good football team, you've got to play both a good offense and a good defense. And remember, WHO is there to support countries and support governments and to work with partners and stakeholders to do so, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and to protect against threats, which of course is the fundamental responsibility of governments, to protect their citizens and their national security from threats, including health threats.
Is that 50%, Peter, an obligation that the member states have signed on to, or is that an aspiration?
The 50% is an obligation that's increasingly being firmed up. We'll know if it actually, if you just look at the generally accepted accounting principles in any management course, you'll know that revenue is booked when it's received.
Yeah.
And
so I think
but it is an obligation. It is something that they agreed to. And so it's a very, very historic step. I would say one of the top 5 things that Tedros has accomplished as he's really transforming WHO under his leadership.
It's, as you said, it's critically important for the WHO to do what it has to do across its mandate. But does it still require member states to advocate for that, or folks to advocate for that with their governments, or
the overall support of WHO by governments is obviously super important. The first thing that depends upon and should depend upon, like it does in the organizations of the people listening, are actually results. There's nothing that generates support better than getting results. And in an organization that has 194 member states, the domestic voices are super important. So I mentioned the partnerships. WHO is us, and letting domestic governments know about your experiences working with WHO, deepening those experiences, making them better for you, because that's the mutual opportunity, making them especially better for the people we serve, and letting domestic governments know that it's something that's working for you, assuming that it is extremely helpful, Keith. And I think that's what you're getting at.
We have 34,000 members around the world, and we're all in the same space. So if they can know that they need to keep, reminding their governments to support this, that's extremely valuable, as you said, to support the WHO. And I wonder, as you mentioned, in terms of evaluating outcomes and activities, whether or not you feel that an independent Office of Evaluating WHO activities would be really useful in being able to strengthen the hand of the Secretariat with respect to funders. Would that be helpful?
So there is an independent evaluation committee. Actually, there's a number of them. They all have letters like IEOAC. There's an independent evaluation department. So the evaluations are useful. But as anyone in the evaluation business knows, what's even more useful than independent evaluation is learning. And that's something that's really, I think, gone into overdrive over the last few years with the creation of Department of Data and Delivery for Impact, with the creation of a chief scientist position. These are the two legs, if you will, on which the triple billion of the first three Ps of promote, provide, protect, walk. And they're very heavily involved in powering progress against the SDGs. But data is so super important. Concrete example, the estimates of excess mortality during COVID and how they correlate with reported mortality. That actually showed the independence of WHO's data function, because in some cases, in some countries, those numbers lined up, and in some countries they didn't.
And I think, as you mentioned, data is so important for the ability of countries or the WHO to do its work. And some have called for independent data boards, both at the country level, working with Office of National Statistics, to work with them to be able to put out independent data analysis publicly. Is that something that the WHO is looking for to doing in terms of creating an independent data board that would be able to do the analysis, create the data, and then release it publicly to avoid the kind of criticisms that took place about manipulation and political interference, and that wouldn't, in doing so, would protect the Secretariat, and it would help to strengthen its independence?
Yeah, data is super important. And I would say this about the role of data. It's really the lifeblood of the organization. I would say that it ties very closely to accountability, which is what you're getting at. And so a concrete example is the proposal for Universal Health Preparedness Review, which is actually moving accountability from an external wise persons group, if you will, to peer-to-peer accountability, like what you see in the Human Rights Commission. That's super useful, because that's a very, very strong form of accountability. I guess, Keith, when I went there, if you ask yourself, if I asked myself, what are the top 2 or 3 problems in data or challenges in data in WHO, I would say the top one is, and you referenced it when you talked about national statistics organizations. When I went there, it was all about indicators. Everybody always wants to talk about indicators, the SDG indicators, et cetera, especially at the global level. But countries always want to talk about data systems. So the top thing is strengthening data systems. And WHO actually has a methodology called SCORE to analyze the data systems, to work with the national statistics offices to strengthen them. If there's no data systems, there's no data. So that's a key challenge. I would say the second key challenge is moving from data and delivery. It's great to have data, but even if you surface it, even if it's independent, it doesn't magically cause change. So the Department of Data and Delivery for Impact that I mentioned, led by wonderful colleague Samira Asma, has been working for 5 years to think about how to support countries and work with countries to prioritize what they focus on. Example, maternal mortality. Imagine a world where a health minister every quarter would say, well, here's the 5 most important metrics for me. And working with their other ministerial colleagues, doing a stock take of those, finding the data and asking, well, what are the blockages to maternal mortality? How do we improve it? And supported by WHO to do that. So that's number 2. Number 3, of course, in any organization, independence is always a challenge. But as I say, I think that with the leadership of Tedros, you've got very good proof points of independent dissemination of data, even when it may not be to the liking of an individual member state. And the best proof point is a very recent one. It's the estimated excess mortality of COVID. So super important, but I would look at data in that broader sense and think about, first of all, the sources and the systems. Secondly, the data to delivery to implementation aspect. And then thirdly, the independence aspect, because what independence really is about is accountability and state to state accountability, like with this Universal Health Preparedness Review, is a very interesting new nuance on making sure countries are better prepared in the future than they were with COVID-19.
And their ability to do that, as you mentioned, really relates on capacity. Producing data without the capacity to act on it and implement is a tragedy in many ways. At CUGH, we created a new capacity building platform site, which I'd encourage folks watching this to take a look at our website and find it. But Peter, when I was in Geneva, you shared and you connected us to the new WHO Academy. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it's an exciting opportunity, and I know those listening would like to find out. Ask the question who is sitting here: how can our organizations and academic organizations engage with the WHO?
Yeah, I mean, the WHO Academy is an initiative that's very exciting, very strongly championed by the government of France, which is much appreciated. And it has a physical place in Lyon, but more to the point, it takes the huge amount of programs for capacity strengthening, training, et cetera, that WHO has and harmonizes them and puts them in one place under the rubric of a WHO Academy. And it's an obvious focal point for a group like WHO and a group like CUGH that's so focused on training and capacity strengthening around the world to find mutual opportunity. So that's one of the areas where I think we'd be very excited, Keith, to work with you and your 34,000 colleagues to really strengthen the offerings that we can collectively give to colleagues. And if you don't think that's important, just think about this concrete example: one course. Training health workers to don and doff personal protective equipment in the middle of a pandemic. All you need to do is think about that one concrete example, and you realize how important and life-saving training can be.
That's a perfect example, Peter, as to set out the need, but also the challenge for us to work together on this. And I know our members would love to find a way to work with the WHO Academy to do that. And so if we can transition in the time remaining to your blog, regardless of where you are in your career, it's a wonderful blog, which you're going to tell folks how to sign up for. But tell us about the blog and why you did it.
Thanks. I did it because of what we talked about at the outset. I have always tried in my career to find problems and solve them, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. And one way of saying why I started a blog is I didn't want other people to make the same mistakes. And so you could improve your contribution. I mean, to everyone listening, I would say this. I would really encourage you to think about your career not as a series of titles that you hold, but as the problems you've solved and the contribution you make to the well-being of others. And that's really, it really came home to me. I was speaking with John Evans when I was at a late John Evans, an inflection point in my career. And he told me, you know, it's not what's on the outside of your tombstone that matters, it's what's on the inside of your tombstone, by which I think he meant contribution as opposed to title. I thought that was a great way to do it. So in my blog, and we'll provide some information in the written materials, as you say, about how to get there. I'm putting out every couple of weeks some thoughts, some insights. The first little series was on career advice for young and not so young people. The top line career advice being find a problem and solve it. So I go through how do you find a problem, how do you solve it, how do you evaluate the results, but also then the next one, getting mentors working for you. How to reach out to them, and the idea that mentorship can actually be a way to entrench privilege, but it can also be a way to promote equity. And I delve into that quite a bit. And then finally, leveraging your platform, which the advice there is hop aboard a rocket ship when it passes by. For me, that rocket ship was the Gates Grand Challenges in Global Health, Grand Challenges Canada. But for each and every one of your viewers, there will be some rocket ship that passes by. Take the risk, hop on board. So one thing was career advice to young people. That just gives you a flavor. I hope people have a look. And now I've turned attention to speeding up the SDGs, just like we were talking about, the Sustainable Development Goals. They're going at about a quarter the pace or less that we need to. So let's think hard together about how do you speed them up, using data and delivery for impact, using innovation of various kinds, including financial innovation, social innovation, and then, of course, partnerships. And just to take a couple concrete examples, you know, on innovation, maybe 5 or 10% of the people in the world who have mental health condition actually get access to any sort of treatment. So a lot of people know, for example, about the Friendship Bench, a psychiatrist in Zimbabwe, Dixon Chibanda, trained grandmothers to do cognitive behavioral therapy for mild and moderate depression on a park bench. And that was super interesting. He's reached 94,000 people. And in 2023, he expects that to be up to 200,000. That's an example of the type of innovation you can do to speed up the SDGs in a critical area like mental health, or in the area of partnership. You know, through the SDG 3 Global Action Plan, we've been working with 13 multilateral agencies to see how they can work better together. And one of the things we've done is surveyed governments. So we have 52 governments around the world saying, well, this is how we think the multilateral agencies are supporting our national priorities and how they're working together. And here's how you could do better. And that's really asking the voice of the people that count in countries themselves and their elected representatives to about how we can all be better to serve better, to accelerate progress to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I started it, Keith, to share some lessons, to help people maybe avoid some mistakes. And the first couple of themes are career advice and speeding up the SDGs. And I'm sure we'll find other stuff to talk about as we go along. And would love to engage people on it and hear what they think and share views on whatever is of interest. Thank you, Keith, for the opportunity to mention that.
Oh no, great! It's a wonderful blog, Peter, and extremely well written and really very fascinating to read. And how do people get to your blog? Where would they find it?
It's on Substack, and so we'll put a link to the blog itself in the materials associated with this thing, but also it's easy to find if you follow me on Twitter at Peter A. Singer or on LinkedIn. And would be great to connect. And what I really hope to achieve, Keith, is to help colleagues around the world, including maybe even especially younger colleagues, just to maximize the contribution that they can make by avoiding some of the mistakes that I've made, and by maybe learning, by sharing some of the lessons. And so that's really my goal. My goal is to help people like the people listening to this video to make an even greater contribution. Because if you think about it, I mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals were going slowly, lagging, but they're only as useful, they're only as good as the people working to solve them, and how we're working together to solve them. And if you want to think of a better world, what I think about almost immediately is thousands or tens of thousands of young people, including and especially in countries themselves, leading, solving problems, making their communities better. That's the way to change the world. And those are the people, Keith, that are listening to this video. And so I really want to reach out and join hands and just work together to help you contribute in the greatest way you can. If you think about yourself 50 years from now and what you will be happy with in terms of a life well lived, I want to suggest that the contributions you've made, the people you've helped, those are the things you'll be happy with on the professional side, and obviously the relationships that you've built. Everything else is transitory. Everything else is dust. And so another way of putting it is trying to help people get to that place of that life well lived. And more generally, just to come back to WHO at the end, it's the same story for WHO. There's so much mutual opportunity between each and every person here. Whether it is the internship program for younger people, whether it's the youth council, whether it's the junior professional officer program, whether it's the young professionals program for people from low and lower middle income countries, or whether it's for academics, the engagement on the many WHO committees and groups providing technical advice. There's just so many different ways to get involved. Would really love to extend a hand to all colleagues listening to join us in this 75th year, because us is we is us. You're WHO, and so let's really embark on this. Let's really embark on this journey together. To really help the world achieve the highest attainable state of health, and at least as importantly, to double down on global health equity, because that's really the method, that's really the lesson of the pandemic, and acknowledging privilege, stepping aside, enabling colleagues closest to the problem to solve their own problems is also a huge part of it. And that, of course, is quintessential to WHO, with its 194 countries, governments joining, and from right around the world.
No, I think, Peter, that's a good way to end off. And you've given a path forward and a challenge to all of our members. And I think it certainly speaks to our members, Peter, who constantly say, how can I make a difference? How can I get involved? How can I impact what we're doing? And one big area that we would love to work with you, that our friend Dr. Tim Evans, the son of Professor Evans Sr., the late Professor Evans, and Dr. Francis Omaswa from HS in Uganda, said, we missed the opportunity to work with governments to build their capacity to deliver the public goods that their people want. And without that, those governments are really hampered by being able to deliver those public goods and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So, Peter, you've told everybody they can connect with you on Peter A. Singer on Twitter. That's where they'll find your blog and how to join up and sign up for it. And from all of us at CUGH, Dr. Peter Singer, thank you very much for being here on this Global Health Leader interview. And we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you, Keith, and congratulations on all the 34,000 people at CUGH are doing. And congratulations, Keith, on what you've personally done to help build up the organization over the 10 plus years that you've been there.
Well, thanks, Pete. Definitely a massive team effort, and couldn't do it with my great team here, some of which was on today with Dalal and Jenna and Julia and Laura and the team. But thank you for your kindness and your ongoing support. We look forward to working with you together for a stronger WHO and for a safer, healthier world for all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you.